one of the victims I was working with was assaulted at midnight on a Saturday night in the Castro. If you've ever been in the Castro, it's full of folks. And what they were doing is kids in a gang, and they were just saying faggot. Everybody that walked by. And this kid had been in San Francisco for like 2 weeks. And he moved to San Francisco so he didn't have to hear people call him faggot. And so everybody else was just like, whatever, you know, I'm going the Midnight Sun or the cafe or wherever they were going, and they just walked by. They couldn't believe anybody would be so insane as to call someone faggot at midnight on a Saturday night in the Castro. And this kid said, fuck you to these guys, and they beat him, and they chased him back and forth across the street, beating this kid as he's running in on a car, trying to escape them. So I guess, you know, I don't know what the message is or the takeaway. I do know that the queer press is vital, essential. You know, Cynthia and I worked on so much stuff. That's how we turned people out for this march. It was flyers and the BAR, full-page ad in the BAR. That's how we did equal benefits. We didn't get carried. In fact, the Tinky Winky protest was the first time we got picked up by the straight press on any of the work we were doing. Yet we ran a national boycott. So, you know, and papers, and the thing is, there's fewer papers now than there were when we were doing this. There was the Windy City Times, and the Blade was a real paper, not to criticize the Blade, but, you know, it wasn't this big thing, and there were Atlanta, and all across the South, and all across the country, and it really allowed us to do things that I don't know that we can still do in the same way.
Jim Hammer recalls how the brutality of Matthew Shepard's beating was remembered by many when hearing the story of San Francisco resident Diane Whipple, the victim of the dog mauling. Jim was assigned to be the prosecuting attorney in the Diane Whipple case.
I have to say, honestly, the moment I heard about Matthew Shepard is a bit hazy to me. I remember being horrified by it, but the moment I'll never forget is when I heard his mother speak live in San Francisco. And I was reduced to tears. I've been a prosecutor most of my legal career, and to hear, if you've ever met someone's mother speak about learning about their child's death before his or her time, there's nothing more devastating you can ever encounter. And she, with great strength and dignity, talked about her young kid being crucified onto a fence, and I'm almost reduced to tears now when I think about it. Where my mind goes beyond that, having spent most of my career as a prosecutor, is sort of Jeff's point. You think, how can this happen, or what's in the mind of a perpetrator? And I think you have to go really back to Harvey Milk in San Francisco and Dan White, and to think people get away with this stuff. I mean, that's the shocking part. Not that people are filled with hate or prejudice or bias, but that people get away with this stuff. And I was a kid when it happened, but I remember it well. You know, Dan White in this city right here 30 years ago basically got away with double murder in San Francisco. Took a gun, sneaked through a window, blew out the brains of one man, and then reloaded and did it again. And San Franciscans let him go. He walked out of jail a couple of years later for a double homicide with lots of witnesses and a confession. So if you think, you know, here in San Francisco, just 30 years ago, a man got away with double murder. That's then. 6 years ago, and I could tell a million stories about it, but when I was in Los Angeles prosecuting these two lawyers who owned these vicious dogs who killed a beautiful young woman, Diane Whipple, and you think it's going to be, well, it's a novel theory, and it's how can a dog mauling be a death, and all these sort of arcane legal issues. In the middle of the closing argument, a very progressive, lefty defense attorney pointed at me, and there had been a profile of me in the Los Angeles Times about being gay and from San Francisco and a prosecutor, and she pointed at me 6 years ago and said, and why is he pandering to the gay folks, to the gays and lesbians in San Francisco? Now, you might think that's ridiculous and desperate. What I thought was, oh my God, is this going to work? What are those 12 people whom I don't know very well, of all sorts of different backgrounds and ages and genders and who knows sexuality as well? What are they thinking about it? Are they going to say, yeah, well, why is this a murder case? Is that guy gay? He's from San Francisco. He has short hair. Is he gay? And why all the hubbub about this? Why all the press because a lesbian got killed in San Francisco? That's what she tried. And rather than dismissing it, I went, oh my God, what if this works? Now, 2.5 days later, the jury said that was a bunch of BS, and we don't care if she's gay or lesbian or transgender or anything. It doesn't matter to us. But I think that's in part because she was beautiful, and because everyone could imagine her being their daughter or their sister. But what if she'd been a transgender or an old leather queen or somebody unattractive? I think this stuff is live and sick and well in America still, especially in places not as progressive as these cities, and it scares me.
Ed Wallace was working on a TV assignment desk the night Matthew Shepard died.
Yeah, I remember first hearing about this case. Actually, it was about 3:30 or 4 in the morning. I was writing for the morning show at that time because I do both writing and assignment desk work. And I overheard the producer and an anchor talking about the circumstances of this case and whether or not to put it in the newscast. And this is the first I've heard of it. And I was doing other work, but they were talking more and more about the details, and they eventually decided to put it in the newscast because even though it wasn't in our area, the details were so horrific. And this is obviously something that touched people everywhere, not just gay people. And so they eventually decided to put it in the newscast. And then after that, I've learned more and more details about the case. And I was also working, as you mentioned, at the assignment desk when Matthew Shepard had died. That evening, we sent a news crew to the MCC Church, the Metropolitan Community Church, where they were having one of their regular services, and one of the big focuses of the service was to pray for, to send well wishes to Matthew Shepard, who was still in the hospital, and the people at the MCC Church all filled out well wishes and then faxed them to the hospital. And the hospital, as a result of that service, got a stack of faxes at the hospital. And as part of our coverage at Channel 7, we put up an email address where people could send emails to the hospital to express their well wishes to Matthew and his family. And we heard later that just after that story ran, the email server was overwhelmed with emails. They got hundreds and hundreds of emails as a result of that story. And it was just about the time that we ran the story and these emails were being sent to the hospital that Matthew Shepard had died. And it's something that really shocked all of us in the newsroom, I think. One of the producer who was working that night, when he heard the overwhelming response from our viewers, he cried. He cried because of just the outpouring of support from our viewers and how we could make a little bit of difference. Of course, sadly, we learned later, after the newscast, that Matthew Shepard had died.
For 15 years, Reverend Jim Mikulski was pastor of the MCC Church. He remembers the impact of Matthew Shepard's death had on members of his church in the Castro.
Well, I remember reading in the New York Times that Sunday morning about the attack on Matthew Shepard, and I knew that at church that day, we needed to focus our ritual life, our prayers, our songs, the sermon, everything around this event. We wanted to pray for healing for Matthew Shepard. We wanted to pray for vindication for his family. And at the time, we didn't know that this would be a broadcast story. You know, marginalized and oppressed people are accustomed to having the significant events in our lives not necessarily noticed or recognized by others. And there was something about this story that had the same impact in our movement that the coverage 43 years earlier of Emmett Till's death in the South had on the civil rights movement. But you couldn't know that at the time. This is what I remember, though. Intense prayer, singing, tears, a quality of community that in the midst of loss, which we were very accustomed to from the AIDS years, we were still able to translate into action. And I think that the best of what our community is capable of was evoked during that period. And I want to lift it up in counterpoint to just a year or so later, the difficulty that I experienced working in the Castro as the pastor of the church when we had a homeless youth shelter named after Matthew Shepard, Matt's Place, we called it. And there was a lot of antagonism towards queer homeless youth by gay homeowners in the Castro neighborhood. Our movement at the time found it easier to mourn the death of a teenager in Wyoming than to care for the lives of queer homeless youth on the streets of our city.